On my birthday, my mother-in-law whispered to her son, "While everyone is here, go and change the locks of his house." An hour later, he returned, pale as a ghost, and quietly said, "Mom, there, before we continue, don't forget to write in the comments which country you're from and how old you are. Enjoy listening." The house was alive with the kind of vibrant chaos that only a milestone birthday could bring. It was my 35th, and our modest two-story colonial in the quiet suburbs was packed to the brim with family, friends, and neighbors, all gathered to celebrate me. Fairy lights cast a golden glow across the living room, their soft hues dancing off the colorful streamers I'd spent hours pinning up with my husband, Mark. The dining table was a feast for the senses, my signature lasagna, still steaming in its ceramic dish, sat beside a towering three-tiered chocolate cake, its frosting gleaming under the chandelier. Bottles of red wine and craft beer clinked in toasts, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of marinara, sugar, and the faint jasmine perfume of the candles I'd lit. Laughter rippled through the crowd, punctuated by the upbeat rhythm of a jazz playlist Mark had curated for the night. Mark was in his element, moving through the guests with a boyish grin, pouring drinks and slicing cake. His dark hair fell into his eyes as he laughed at his uncle's tired jokes, and every time he glanced my way, I felt a warmth that grounded me. This was our life, hard-won, imperfect, but ours. I stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, watching him weave through the crowd, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. But not everyone was caught up in the festive spirit. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, stood apart, a solitary figure near the back of the living room. She was a tall, wiry woman, her sharp features framed by a severe bob of graying hair. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room like a hawk sizing up its prey. In the 10 years I'd been married to Mark, Evelyn had never warmed to me. To her, I was the outsider, the woman who'd stolen her son, a perpetual disappointment who'd never live up to her impossible standards. Tonight, she clutched a glass of red wine, her lips pursed in that familiar disapproving line, her gaze darting between me and her daughter, Emily, Mark's younger sister. Emily was 28, slight and nervous, with a fidgety energy that made her seem younger than her years. She stood beside Evelyn, her hands twisting the hem of her oversized sweater, her eyes flicking toward me as Evelyn whispered something in her ear. I couldn't hear their words over the chatter and music, but the intensity of their exchange sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn's hand gripped Emily's arm, her knuckles white, and her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, cold, sharp, and unmistakably hostile. A knot formed in my stomach, a quiet warning that something was off. I tried to shake it off. It was my birthday, after all, and Mark was by my side, his arm brushing against mine as he leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Happy birthday, love," he said, his voice warm and teasing, chasing away the unease. I smiled, determined not to let Evelyn's icy presence ruin the night. But as the party rolled on, I noticed Emily slip out the back door, her movements quick and furtive, like a shadow slipping into the night. Nobody else seemed to notice, but Evelyn watched her go, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. My unease deepened, rooting itself in my chest. The next hour passed in a blur of celebration. Mark's cousins recounted their latest hiking misadventure, their gestures wild and their laughter loud. My coworker, Sarah, ever the wine enthusiast, was trying to convince everyone to try her latest find, waving a bottle like a preacher with a sermon. My parents were deep in conversation with Mark's aunt, reminiscing about old family vacations. But my mind kept drifting back to Emily's absence and Evelyn's whispered words. What were they up to? Why had Emily left without a word, and why did Evelyn look so smug about it? Then she returned. The back door creaked open, and Emily stepped into the kitchen, her face pale as the moonlight spilling through the window. Her hands trembled as she shoved them into her pockets, and her eyes were wide, almost haunted, like she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. She didn't rejoin the party, didn't grab a drink or make small talk. Instead, she made a beeline for Evelyn, who was still lingering by the fireplace, her wine glass now empty. I edged closer, pretending to adjust the Bluetooth speaker, straining to catch their conversation over the din of the party. "Mom." Emily's voice was barely audible, shaking with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or shock. "There." Evelyn's face tightened, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Not here," she hissed, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the kitchen. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Something was very wrong. I waited a moment, then followed, keeping my steps light, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the window. Evelyn and Emily stood near the sink, their voices low but urgent, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. "What do you mean, there?" Evelyn snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you do it?" Emily swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing. "I went to the house, like you said. I got the new locks, and I started to change them. But Mom, there was someone already there." Evelyn froze, her hand tightening on Emily's arm until she winced. "What?" "Someone was inside the house," Emily whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. "I heard them, moving around. Footsteps, heavy ones, upstairs. I didn't see who it was, but it wasn't her." My blood turned to ice, my breath catching in my throat. They were talking about our house, the one we were standing in right now. Changing the locks? Why? And who was inside? The party was still in full swing, laughter and music spilling from the living room. Everyone was here. Nobody could be in the house, unless someone had slipped away unnoticed, or someone else was involved. I slipped back to the party before they saw me, my mind a whirlwind of questions. Why would Evelyn tell Emily to change the locks on my house on my birthday? Was this some kind of cruel power play, a way to lock me out of my own home? And what did Emily mean by someone was there? My eyes scanned the room, landing on Mark, who was laughing with his cousins, oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. Could he be involved? No, that was impossible. Mark was my anchor, the one person I trusted completely. But Evelyn had always wanted me gone. out of Mark's life, out of her family. Was this her plan to push me out? I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet and slipped out the front door, telling Mark I was stepping out for some air. He gave me a curious look, his brow furrowing, but he nodded, too caught up in hosting to press me further. The night was chilly, the air sharp with the promise of rain, the street quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Our house was a 2-story colonial, nothing extravagant but ours, bought with years of savings and late-night budgeting sessions. I circled to the back, where Emily had gone, and checked the door. The lock was the same old brass one we'd had for years, scratched and worn from daily use, its familiar weight reassuring in my hand. No sign of tampering, no new locks. But as I stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, I heard it. A faint creak from inside, like a floorboard settling under weight. My heart stopped. The house was supposed to be empty. Everyone was at the party, just a block away at the community center we'd rented for the night. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath, my pulse hammering in my ears. Another sound, a soft thud, like something heavy being moved, followed by the faint rustle of fabric. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, the metal cold against my palm. I unlocked the door and stepped into the kitchen, the darkness swallowing me whole. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, jagged shadows across the tile. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling in the silence. No answer. But the air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Someone had been here, or was still here. I moved through the house, my sneakers silent on the hardwood, checking every room. The living room was untouched, the couch cushions still fluffed from my obsessive tidying. The dining room was pristine, the table still set with the remnants of our pre-party prep, extra napkins, a half-empty bottle of wine. But when I reached the upstairs hallway, I froze. The door to the guest room, the one we rarely used, was ajar, a thin sliver of darkness spilling out. I was certain I'd closed it before we left for the party. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking softly. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, the curtains drawn tight. But the window was open, the cool night air slipping in, making the curtains flutter like ghosts. I crossed the room, my steps cautious, and closed the window, locking it with a click that echoed in the silence. That's when I saw it. Half hidden under the bed, a small black duffel bag, its zipper glinting in the dim light. It wasn't ours. We didn't own anything like it. I knelt, my heart racing, and unzipped the bag, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Inside were tools, a crowbar, a screwdriver, a pair of bolt cutters, their handles worn but sturdy. My stomach churned. These weren't household tools. They were the kind you'd use to break into something, or out of it. Tucked inside a side pocket was a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed. I opened it, my breath catching as I read the scrawled words. "Get her out by midnight. Use the back door." The note slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. My mind reeled. Get Her. Out? Me? Was this Evelyn's plan? To lock me out of my own home and what? Take over the house? Steal something? And who had been here, leaving this bag behind? The creaks, the thud. Someone had been in this room, maybe minutes ago. I grabbed the note and the bag, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and fury, and ran back to the party, the cold air biting at my face as I sprinted down the street. The community center was still alive with chatter, the warmth of the celebration a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Evelyn and Emily were back in the kitchen, their heads bent together, whispering again, their shadows sharp against the fluorescent light. I didn't bother with stealth this time. I stormed in, slamming the note on the counter, the duffel bag hitting the floor with a heavy thud that made Emily jump. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage, loud enough to draw curious glances from the living room. Evelyn's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her face hardening into that familiar mask of disdain. "I don't know what you're talking about, Danielle," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, pointing at Emily, who looked like she might bolt. "You told her to change the locks on my house. Why? And who was in my house just now?" Emily's face went even paler, her hands trembling visibly now, her eyes darting to Evelyn for rescue. I didn't... Enough!" Evelyn cut her off, stepping forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You're paranoid, Danielle. Always have been. Nobody's trying to do anything to you." "Then explain this." I held up the note, my voice rising, the words trembling with barely contained anger. "Get her out by midnight? What's that supposed to mean? Are you trying to kick me out of my own home?" The kitchen door swung open, and Mark appeared, his face creased with worry, his eyes wide with confusion. "Danielle, what's going on? Why are you shouting?" His voice was soft but strained, his hands twisting together in front of him. I turned to him, my heart aching at the sight of his distress. "Mark, your mother and sister are plotting something. They tried to change the locks on our house, and someone was inside, Mark. Someone who shouldn't have been there." Mark's eyes darted to his mother, then to Emily, who wouldn't meet his gaze, her head bowed like a scolded child. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling, a tear glistening at the corner of his eye. Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression unreadable, her posture rigid. "She's delusional, Mark. You know how she gets, always making mountains out of molehills." But Emily cracked under the weight of Mark's stare, her resolve crumbling like dry sand. "It's true," she blurted, her voice breaking, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom told me to change the locks. She said it was to protect you, Mark, to get her out of the picture." Mark's face crumpled, his hands flying to his mouth as tears spilled down his cheeks. "Mom? Why?" His voice was a mix of hurt and disbelief, his eyes searching Evelyn's face for an explanation that made sense. Evelyn's composure faltered, her lips twitching, but she straightened, her voice cold as steel. "Because she's not good for you, Mark," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "She's holding you back. You deserve better, a better life, a better future. She's not one of us." "Better?" I shouted, my anger boiling over, my fists clenched at my sides. "This is my home, my life. You don't get to decide that." Mark stepped between us, his hands raised, his face streaked with tears. "Stop it, all of you," he cried, his voice raw with emotion. "Mom, how could you do this? And Emily, you went along with it. You're my family." Emily hung her head, her voice barely audible, choked with guilt. "I didn't want to, Mark. But Mom said, she said there was something else. Something about the house." "What about the house?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the note, the paper crumpling in my hand. Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking to Evelyn, who glared at her with a look that could freeze fire. "She said there's something hidden in it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something valuable. She wouldn't tell me what, but she said we had to get you out to find it." The kitchen fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on us like a storm cloud. Something hidden in the house? Valuable? My mind flashed back to the duffel bag, the tools, the note. This wasn't just about locking me out. There was something bigger at play, something Evelyn was willing to betray her own son for. Mark's face was a mask of shock, his eyes wide, his hands trembling as he looked at his mother. "Show me," I said, my voice low and steady despite the storm in my chest. "Whatever you think is in my house, we're finding it. Now." Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but Mark cut her off, his voice like ice, sharp and unyielding. "No, Mom. If there's something going on, I want to know. We're going back to the house. All of us." We left the party in a tense procession. The guests left bewildered as we piled into cars and drove the short distance back to our house. The night felt heavier now, the stars hidden behind thick clouds, the air thick with the scent of impending rain. I led the way, my keys clutched tightly in my hand, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder, its weight a constant reminder of the mystery we were unraveling. Mark walked beside me, his face pale, his eyes red from crying, his hand brushing against mine as if seeking reassurance. Emily trailed behind, her head bowed, her steps heavy with guilt. Evelyn strode with a defiant air, her chin high, as if she still believed she could control the outcome. Inside, I took them straight to the guest room and dropped the duffel bag on the floor, the tools clattering inside. Mark gasped when he saw them, his hand flying to his mouth, his eyes wide with horror. "Whose is this?" he asked, his voice shaking, his fingers digging into my arm. "Not mine," I said grimly, my eyes locked on Evelyn. "But someone was here, and they left this behind." Evelyn's eyes flickered toward the closet, a fleeting glance that didn't escape me. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a telltale sign of guilt or knowledge. I followed her gaze and opened the closet door, the hinges creaking softly. The closet was sparse, just a few boxes of old clothes, a stack of Christmas decorations, and a dusty vacuum cleaner. But the floorboards looked wrong. One was slightly raised, its edges uneven, as if it had been pried up and put back in a hurry. My heart pounded as I knelt, running my fingers along the wood, feeling the faint give beneath my touch. I grabbed the crowbar from the duffel bag and jammed it under the board, prying it up with a groan of wood that echoed in the silent room. The board came free, revealing a small metal box, its edges rusted, its surface cold and heavy in my hands. My breath caught as I lifted it out, the weight of it surprising me, its surface scratched and worn with age. It was locked with a heavy padlock, the kind that required more than a key to open. "What is this?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes fixed on the box as if it might bite. Evelyn's eyes gleamed with something I couldn't place. Greed, maybe, or triumph. "Open it," she said, her voice tight, her hands clenched at her sides. I grabbed the bolt cutters from the bag and snapped the lock, the metal giving way with a sharp crack that made Emily flinch. Inside was a collection of documents, yellowed and brittle with age, their edges curling like ancient scrolls. Tucked beside them was a small velvet pouch, its fabric worn but intact. I opened the pouch first, and a handful of glittering diamonds spilled into my hand, their facets catching the dim light of the room, casting tiny rainbows across the walls. Mark gasped, his hand gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. Emily's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I set the diamonds aside, my hands trembling, and pulled out the documents, unfolding them carefully to avoid tearing the fragile paper. There were deeds, letters, and a few grainy photographs, all tied to the house. The papers told a story of a previous owner, a reclusive jeweler named Harold Grayson, who'd lived here in the 1950s. According to the letters, Grayson had been involved in a smuggling ring, hiding stolen diamonds in the house to keep them safe from his partners, who'd grown suspicious of his double dealing. He'd died suddenly, a heart attack, the documents said, before he could retrieve them, and the secret had been lost, buried in the walls of the house. Until now. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, low and fervent, almost reverent. "I knew it," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the diamonds, her hands twitching as if she wanted to snatch them up. "My father worked for Grayson. He was a delivery driver, just a nobody. But he overheard things, conversations, plans. He told me stories when I was a child, about a fortune hidden in this house. Nobody believed him, thought he was spinning tales to entertain me. But I never forgot. When Mark bought this place, I knew it was fate." "So you tried to lock me out to get to it?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief, my anger rising like a tide. "You were going to steal from your own son?" "I was protecting him," Evelyn snapped, her eyes blazing, her voice rising to match mine. "You'd squander it, Danielle. You're not one of us. Mark deserves that money, that legacy. It's his birthright, not yours." Mark's voice was cold, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mom, you don't get to decide that," he said, his words sharp and unyielding, his tears dry now, replaced by a quiet fury. "This is our house, our life. How could you do this to us?" Before Evelyn could respond, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, like glass shattering against wood, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet house. We froze, the air thick with sudden fear, our breaths held in unison. Someone was in the house. Again. I grabbed the crowbar, my heart in my throat, my knuckles white around the cold metal. I motioned for everyone to stay quiet, my eyes scanning their faces, Mark's wide with fear, Emily's pale with guilt, Evelyn's unreadable but tense. We crept downstairs, the darkness pressing in around us, the air heavy with the scent of rain and broken glass. The living room window was shattered, shards glinting on the hardwood floor like scattered stars. A figure stood in the shadows, holding a flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a blade. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our nosy neighbor, her face pale but defiant, her gray hair disheveled, her eyes wild with determination. "Mrs. Jenkins?" I said, stunned, my voice echoing in the silent room. "What are you doing here?" She turned, her eyes narrowing as she gripped the flashlight like a weapon, its beam wavering slightly in her trembling hand. "I heard everything," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, her words spilling out in a rush. "I've known about the diamonds for years. My husband worked with Grayson, too, back in the day. He was a bookkeeper, saw the ledgers, heard the whispers. He told me the same stories Evelyn's father did. A fortune hidden in this house, waiting to be found. I've been watching this place, waiting for someone to uncover it. When I saw Emily sneaking around earlier, I knew something was up." "You broke into my house?" I asked, incredulous, my grip tightening on the crowbar. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice rising, her eyes darting to the pouch in my hand. "Those diamonds are mine by right. My husband died waiting for them, working himself to the bone for Grayson's scraps. I've waited long enough." Evelyn lunged forward, grabbing for the pouch, her fingers brushing against mine. "They're not yours!" she shouted, her voice shrill with desperation. "They belong to my family!" Chaos erupted. Mark screamed, his hands flying to his face as he backed away. Emily tried to pull Evelyn back, her hands fumbling, her voice pleading for her to stop. Mrs. Jenkins swung her flashlight, narrowly missing my head, the air whistling as it passed. I held onto the pouch, my knuckles white, my heart pounding as the documents scattered across the floor, their brittle pages catching the light. In the distance, I heard sirens, their wail growing louder, cutting through the night. Someone, probably another neighbor, alerted by the crash, had called the police. The officers arrived minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they stormed into the house, their voices sharp and commanding. They sorted through the mess of accusations and broken glass, separating us like children caught in a schoolyard brawl. Evelyn and Mrs. Jenkins were questioned, their stories unraveling under the weight of their own greed and desperation. Emily, racked with guilt, confessed everything. How Evelyn had manipulated her into helping, how she'd planned to lock me out to search for the diamonds, how she'd heard someone in the house when she'd gone to change the locks, her fear stopping her from finishing the job. The diamonds and documents were taken into evidence, sealed in plastic bags and loaded into a police cruiser, their fate to be determined by the courts. Mark and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of our home, broken glass, scattered papers, and the lingering sting of betrayal. Evelyn was charged with conspiracy and attempted theft, her defiance crumbling as she was led away in handcuffs, her eyes still burning with resentment. Mrs. Jenkins faced charges for breaking and entering, her protests growing fainter as she was escorted out. Emily, though complicit, was let off with a warning, her remorse evident in her tear-streaked face, her apologies falling on Mark's deaf ears. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I tried to rebuild, piecing together the fragments of our life. The diamonds, it turned out, were worth millions, their value confirmed by an appraiser hired by the police. But their legal status was a tangle of claims, from Grayson's estate, from the families of his former partners, even from distant relatives who crawled out of the woodwork, sensing a payout. We didn't care. The money wasn't worth the betrayal, the lies, the violation of our home. We told the courts to handle it, signing away any claim to the fortune, and focused on repairing our marriage, strained by the weight of his family's actions. Mark struggled with the loss of his mother's trust, his nights spent crying in my arms, his faith in his family shattered. I held him close, whispering promises that we'd get through this, that our love was stronger than Evelyn's schemes. But the house felt different now, its walls holding secrets we'd never fully unravel. We talked about moving, starting fresh, somewhere new, somewhere untainted by greed and betrayal. But we couldn't bring ourselves to leave. This was our home, hard-won and ours, despite everything. Yet one question lingered, gnawing at me in the quiet moments, keeping me awake long after Mark had fallen asleep. Who was in the house that night when Emily went to change the locks? Mrs. Jenkins swore she hadn't entered until later, her break-in prompted by the commotion at the party. Nobody else admitted to being there, and the police found no other evidence. No fingerprints, no footprints, nothing to suggest another intruder. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a creak in the house, a floorboard settling, or maybe something else. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding, wondering if the jeweler's ghost was still guarding his secret, his presence lingering in the walls. Or if someone else was out there, still watching, still waiting for their chance to claim what they believed was theirs. I started checking the locks obsessively, every night before bed, running my fingers over the brass, ensuring they were secure. Mark noticed, his eyes soft with worry, but he never said anything, just squeezed my hand and led me to bed. The house was ours, but it felt like it belonged to someone else too, someone who'd left their mark in the shadows, in the creaks, in the secrets we'd uncovered but could never fully understand. And as the days turned to weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over, that the house still held one final twist, waiting to be revealed.